I'm going to start by bringing up John Harrington, who is the product lead at IBM Security. So where do we have John? There's John coming up. And then Grant Asplund, Principal Evangelist, Checkpoint. And then Deepak with MPOYNT. So,
Good morning.
Good morning.
You pronounced it wrong.
Here we go. Everybody's mic'd
Hi.
up.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Nice
Grant.
to meet you. Hey, Lars.
Sorry, guys.
Deepak.
Hey, Grant, good to meet you.
All right.
You as well. Hi.
Hey, where am I going?
Well, I'm
Where,
gonna,
are we?
You go right there.
I'll
I'll go
sit
next.
here.
All right,
I get
perfect.
to
Okay,
sit
we're in
today,
order.
So,
Cheers.
so we've seen in our previous discussions that accessing and using information anywhere, anytime, across any device is leading to massive security implications. We talked. Kevin spent a lot of time on this yesterday. He did a great job talking about that. Expanding attack surface, the proliferation of IoT and edge devices, and then managing shared security responsibilities with cloud providers. How do you deal with your partners? The ability to ensure their security. And of course, you saw Crawford on that video talking about data and the explosion of data as we create and deploy applications in real time. And Blaine did a fantastic job yesterday explaining sort of event-driven application framework. So we'll talk about security because, I mean, this is the broadest topic now. So we'll try to take your questions as we go through it. But I wanted to have everybody start by introducing themselves. So briefly, your role, your firm, and then we'll roll into questions. So why don't we start with Deepak?
Sorry, I'm losing my voice. My name is Deepak Gandhi. I'm the VP Enterprise Solutions at MPOYNT. We are a enterprise mobility / managed service provider. Underlying item is we're just basically helping organizations manage the complexities of mobility. We've been in the space about 5 years, US and Canada. Focus again is on driving adoption, making sure the form factors that we're managing are secure, compliant, with the policies that are set by the organizations. We operate predominantly in a variety of verticals, but we have a pretty good footprint in healthcare in US and Canada.
My name's Grant Asplund, and a week ago, I would say I'm the principal evangelist for Dome 9, but last Wednesday, Checkpoint bought us for $200 million. So now I'm back at Checkpoint because I was actually with a company in 1998 that got acquired by Checkpoint, and I was a worldwide evangelist for them for about 4 years till I bought the company back. 5 years later, sold it to Newstar. So I'm back, Checkpoint 2.0. Kind of excited though, we bring to the party a key missing component to Checkpoint's architecture, in particular as the world's moving to a service model. I always like to ask my audiences when I talk about what we do, how many of you have a generator that powers your house primarily? Anybody? You know, we all choose to plug in. We're all going to go there, whether you get drugged there or not. And depending on what analyst firm you believe, you know, as much as 95% or more of the cloud failures you're going to have between now and the next 5 years in Amazon and Google and Azure are going to be your fault. And so that's what we address, how to make this seemingly simple move that looks like it's just a lift and shift and ensure you don't err and believe that folly and really have the right tools to be able to use a one-size-fits-all interface that Deepak and I use for our garage business. We got 4 assets, and he uses for his 50,000 with 5,000 accounts. So you see my point. So I'm thrilled to be here. I've been in the biz since I went from fishing tackle to opening an Apple dealership in '83. I couldn't spell computer. You guys all have letters after your name. My claim to fame is I sold Alaska Airlines their first Mac, or Weyerhaeuser, or some of those companies, and opened the office for Apple back in '87 in Alaska. So I'm a Gilligan. You're all the professors, but hopefully I'll be able to contribute.
Excellent. John?
Morning, my name is John Harrington. I represent IBM Mass 360 with Watson. At the table over there, I got a bunch of IBM security professionals. So I came with a big group from Philadelphia. Bluebell is where we're headquartered, but we're all over the place, as you know. What I focus on the Mass 360 side is what's traditionally been known as enterprise mobility management, but we've transferred over to a new industry moniker, unified endpoint management, to really address a lot of the things that were brought up yesterday around the challenges to be able to manage smartphones, tablets, PCs, laptops, wearables, IoT. And the way that we address it is all from one place. So I'll get into that a little bit today through the prompts that we're going to go through. But if you guys have any questions, again, we're here for the remainder of the trip to ET Exchange, and happy to talk through your challenges and see how we can help.
All right, excellent. So I'm going to just lead off a couple of questions, and then we'll switch to some questions from the group here. So we've talked a lot about cloud and the impact of cloud on enterprise IT. So why don't we start there? So as a consumer of cloud services, and if we all buy into the premise that over time we're going to be using an increasing amount of cloud services, give me your idea of the basic controls that I need to have in place for IaaS, PaaS, software as a service. From your point of view, Deepak, why don't we start with you? What's your advice around this? What are your thoughts?
I think it's the controls are kind of standardized across the platforms that you mentioned, but I think from a human perspective, I'm a big believer of due diligence, right? We have a lot of faith in our SAs to go and do their patches, et cetera, but how often are we going and auditing what they've completed, what they haven't completed, right? Auditing user access controls, auditing where our data is, has there been an underlying change to the policy of the service provider that they haven't really communicated to us? So I think it just comes down to making sure that you're actively not going with that set it and forget it type of mentality. You're actively engaged constantly through the process and auditing and performing a due diligence on your systems as well as your users. I'm sure you can add to that as well.
Boy, not so eloquently. I think one of the most startling facts about the cloud, and in particular as we move to this service model, is when you consider the statistic, whether you believe it's accurate or not, even if they're saying at least 95% will be customers' fault, the failures. So even if they're half off, it's still 1 out of 2 out of you, right? So it should be of concern. Yet there's research that shows more than 50% of enterprises polled have a certified cloud professional on staff. That is just so diametrically opposed to me. When you've got the smart brains in the industry telling you, listen, man, you're going to mess up, and more than half of us are going into it saying, I don't need to learn anything.
He's certified.
And the certifications come. I just did a presentation yesterday. I kind of liken it to like this. I'll bet most of us in this room undoubtedly played baseball as a kid. Right? I know I did, right? Probably many of you. And if you follow the pattern, you maybe picked up golf later in your life. It's folly to think that you were a home run hitter when you were 12 and you can apply that same swing to a ball that's sitting on that little stick. Because if you do, what you probably end up doing is not looking for your ball, but putting it back on and saying, I'll do it again. Because you're applying this principle of what looks very, very similar, but it's wrong. So my caution would be, train your people. Because until we can get rid of the humans, that's your biggest problem. We got to make sure they know what they're doing.
Yeah, that certainly was a theme that Kevin talked a lot about, the need for training and education and ensuring that our staff have the right capabilities. So on the topic of cloud, before we is there questions from the audience around cloud and cloud security specifically? All right.
There is something I'd like to address that I didn't hear brought up, but I think no less important would be the topics of encryption. That's basic, but sometimes you look in, peel back the onion and you see that's not even being enforced. So, basic stuff that you can all manage and handle that just isn't getting addressed. Single sign-on, identity management, who's accessing your data, where are they accessing it from, do you recognize them, should they be accessing it, and what are they accessing and is that secure, right?
Mm-hmm.
That type of methodology, pretty easy to look at, if you take a step back, but a lot of folks are slipping in that area. And then, investments. I think a lot of organizations, when you think about where to start, a SIM or a tool that allows you to actually see activity and event information, something that can log activity and help you prioritize, that's something that is definitely of utmost importance.
Yeah.
The one thing I think I would caution, though, we oftentimes think, hey, let's just go get another cool tool. Mm-hmm. Especially you start moving into the cloud, and now instead of a policy for a firewall, you got a policy for every microservice. So your guy's hair's on fire with the alerts, okay? Because they're coming from everywhere all the time. You have all the information. It's in your logs. All of them. Everywhere. Keep them. When you move to the cloud, storage is pretty simple, pretty elastic. Keep them all forever. Mm-hmm. Because all you got to do is read the reports that say that it's taken us years sometimes to find breaches. Which, by the way, if we talk at all about this recent legislation that I just tried to follow up on that you've passed here, I think it's amazing because the fact is, how many of you know of every breach when it happens? I mean, what we should be doing is creating laws that give you an incentive to report the breach in as quick, shortest time as possible. If it takes you a week, it costs you more. It takes you a month, it costs you more. It takes you a year, it's really going to hurt. And we'll start to change our mentality about being proactive and really looking for this stuff and not waiting for it to bite us.
So I think that's a great idea. I don't expect we'll see changes in the law in Canada to that. So, so maybe building on that then, in terms of, how do you, as a Canadian organization today, Kevin talked a lot about the proliferation of different vendors, different solutions, point solutions, so forth. What's your perspective on your point of view and best practices? What should I do as an IT leader in Canada today around that? Maybe John, you want to kick us off on that?
Yeah, I think the first place to start, and again, this is kind of basic, but some folks do overlook this piece, is does this organization I'm working with give me enough transparency? Am I doing enough due diligence to really see what they're using, why they chose that solution, what extent can it go for me, and what extent are they actually utilizing it? And also, what type of process is in place to make sure that you're assessing what time you actually replace it. Is it actually up to snuff with your standards or what you need for your own internal security? And are there assessments being taking place to ensure that that's happening? So I think those two things, demanding that is very, very important as you take that route of, working with an MSSP, put the accountability on them to do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it's twofold. I think there's a bit of reciprocity in there as well because, you'll see certain providers may have an enhanced level of sort of a security posture or a certain process or a workflow that they have internally that organizations can benefit from, right? Like we can't really, preach that something that we're not exactly actively using ourselves, right? And we have to sort of be the pioneers, even as leaders in our organizations. Like, if I'm coming in late every day, I'm gonna go and say, hey, Tony, you got to come in on time. That's not really up there. So I think it's also sharing notes and understanding. To give them a security questionnaire and say, hey, check the boxes, I think is insufficient. I don't think it's an adequate practice to actually implement or even bring in a MSSP or even a third-party vendor to kind of fulfill the role. I think it's come down to a lot with transparency, auditing, and constantly auditing. There could be changes. There could be a person that was the person who actually set up that infrastructure is no longer there. That questionnaire yearly has to be, or quarterly, or depending on your compliance footprint or compliance requirements, it has to be constantly audited and brought to light if their vendor requirements have changed or if their compliance requirements have changed over time. So
I think it's fair to say every one of you are busier than a three-headed cat at a bird show. Every day. And that makes life tough to break out of it, right? I saw a stat the other day. Average enterprise today has more than 80, that's 80 vendors solutions in their organization. So I would really caution everyone, don't go look for the next hot, slick bell or whistle, because you got it all. As I said earlier, I really believe if you go back and reevaluate how you capture your logs, how you're viewing your logs. You know, I talk to people, you capturing all your logs from your CloudTrail? Yeah. Do you look at them? Yeah. With what? Well, I look at them. Have anybody ever looked at those? Can you make any, are you a machine? If you are, you can make sense of it, but otherwise, you really can't. Oh, I recognize that port. Oh, yeah, I know that. But it really doesn't help you. So you have the data. I really encourage you to look at finding the best ways to capture and collect it all. I think that's a big thing. And the other thing to remember is, you know, the same top issues from a security concern today have been around for decades. It's passwords, it's human error, right? And there's really not a lot we can do to eliminate the human component. We're trying. But I think, you know, it's don't go out. And I think the last thing I would really encourage you to do, as a guy who got into the industry and couldn't spell computer and has been working for vendors since '87, we want a partnership with you. I know it's tough, especially if you've got 80 vendors, right? But you got to pick your guys, your gals, your reps, your companies that you can really become a partner with. And maybe even take a risk and say, hey, I want to help you build a better product. Because you'll have a partner for life, they'll work hard for you, and it'll help you. But I can guarantee you, if, you know, the tendency is, I mean, everybody, who answers their desk phone? Nobody, right? Maybe your cell phone if it's in your contact list. Because you're getting called by about how many of us every day? A few hundred? So you have to really find ways to meet, contact, and really foster relationships with your vendors. They are your partners.
Yeah, that's a good point for sure in terms of how to managing your vendors. Any questions at this point for our panelists? All right. So one thing I'm curious about is the role of AI in security. So we've talked a lot about AI in general. So talk to me about, you know, from a user perspective, how important is that? So if I'm working with, obviously, how are you incorporating AI into your solutions? Does that matter to me as a buyer of security services? Give me some perspective from your experience around this.
Sure, I can start. And for all respective purposes, it's two-pronged for us at IBM, specific to Mass 360. So we have productivity use cases for AI, but we also have security. So I'll address the security piece, but if anyone's interested, we can talk more about productivity. The way that we've baked it into our platform is with Watson. And we've had this capability for well over a year now. And what we do is we allow Watson to, pulling from structured and unstructured data sources, help all of our customers, so anyone who's ever tried or bought Mass 360 has this functionality, a way to actually see what's out there and how does it correlate to their environment and how it's configured. You know, what types of devices do they have, what operating systems are they running on, how are they being used. And Watson allows administrators to get alerts brought front and center to them to help prioritize what do I act on next, right? With the influx of activity that's coming in every day and the amount of devices, it gets very complex, right? So it allows you to reduce the amount of time, research, consultation amongst your team, and actually be able to see what's happening specifically and follow actionable steps to resolve whatever that problem might be. So for example, when WannaCry occurred, Mass 360 had alerts right on its dashboard, allowing administrators to see that they were affected. Mm-hmm. They were able to see what devices were affected, and they were able to get an actual remediation path that they could click through, literally 1, 2, 3-step process to remediate the problem, simply by patching right out of our platform. So there's stuff like that it's indispensable and completely cater to any given client. So everyone's going to get different alerts depending on what they're working with.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. So Deepak, from your point of view, how do you, so I mean, that's a powerful way to surface things far, far quicker than you otherwise could. So from your point of view, how do you see that playing out?
I think there's a lot of value in being able to have the visibility, but I think that in all these little breaches that are being exposed, from our perspective, it's not as easy as for us to just click a button and say go, because there's an impact to that change for us. So we have a systematic approach that we have to follow to make sure that what exactly is the impact of that, right? In the cloud world, something simple as throwing a monitoring agent on there to monitor a service. If a service goes down, restart it. That's a form of an AI, right? Yeah. But what if there's an underlying layer that we have to go and look at the audit logs to see why is that service being kicked off, right? So I think it's there's always going to be a human component whether we like it or not at some point till these technologies are intelligent enough to be able to do so. We had a chat yesterday about bots. Can bots provide these services? Are they mature enough? I think it's going to take a lot of time for that content and that data to be developed, those systems to mature. But I think it's a requirement to have the visibility in that dashboard in real time to say, hey, there's something there. You're not sitting there for it to be broadcasted on a tech site, right? So, and be able to take actions remotely. But I think from our perspective as a service provider, there's a component that we must go through our change management validation cycles to ensure there's no impact, a larger impact to end users, right? And be able to contain that breach and to ensure it doesn't happen again, right? Otherwise, it's simply as just, that game of you're punching one hole after another, it just doesn't go away, right? So I think it's just making sure the controls are in place and you're managing accordingly.
Great. What comments on that?
Look, I'm
veteran talk.
From the old Saturday Night Live, I'm just a caveman. AI is a sexy term, but it's algorithms, right? It's saying if you see this and you see this and you see this, then take this action that'll trip this, and down goes the mousetrap. It's all about automating, right? And there are things that we should automate. 100%. Like if some yo-yo administrator backs up an asset to the cloud and doesn't know he's got his tail hanging out the window. And we read about them all the time, right? These S3 buckets that are, go to Shodan, do a search for MongoDB and how many of them have passwords. Right. 69,000 we found yesterday with no passwords. Or excuse me, that were available on the internet, 23,000 that didn't have passwords. One of them we actually could have uploaded a file to. So, I guess the thing is, if you can automate functions that say, I don't want a single asset exposed to the internet. If I see one, fix it back. That, I think, makes a lot of sense. Are we going to, I don't think we're going to get to the point where I'm going to talk to Alexa and ask if I have irritable bowel system today because I don't feel good. Can you tell from my biorhythms and all of that? I think we're still a way away. But I think we want to automate as much as we can. We want to look to use tools to have those efficiencies. I think that's one of the reasons things like Lambda and some of these infrastructure as code. There's just some really cool stuff you can do. I think that's definitely going to take off. The AI, I kind of think is a more sexy term for doing more for me automatically based on criteria that I tell you I want met. So, however narrow that might be.
I agree that it does help automate, but in the example I shared, some administrators may not have had any awareness about that issue, and I think that the fact that it's fine-tuned around identifying that and bringing it front and center to them and giving them the confidence to react quickly with an outline of steps that be followed. You can't, when you think about the outcome, if they didn't get that alert, it's still on them to do the research. It's still on them to decide how do we react. And sometimes the clock ticking, you can't really afford to wait. So in that sense, yeah.
I think what Grant, right? And what Grant's referring to is identifying that breach as well as performing an action on it as well, independently of the user. I think we're ways away that. Like I think the lower level tasks, 100%, like kicking on services back on, et cetera. I think the basics are there. But there was in the video, I believe, of the slide, they said we're going to be more of supervisors. Let the machines handle the automation part of it. Let them handle the day-to-day lower level tasks, and we'll be more supervisors. I see that in a lot what you just said. But I think, again, it's a maturity thing. It is going to take time. It'll get there. But visibility is where it has to start with, because till you get to a point where it becomes a mainstream issue and you have a cookie-cutter approach to address it, something as simple in our world of compliance policy, jailbroken rooted device, put it into quarantine. Pull all corporate policies off that device, but leave it enrolled so we can manage that device. Throw an alert to the user, throw an alert to the administrator, hey, you have a compromised device in your environment. That's a typical use case in our environment. I think it has to get pretty mainstream for us to be able to have a remediation which is standardized across all users, organizations, platforms, and then we can push that out.
So if that's kind of, you see that as standard mainstream use case. So if you think of your leading customers, the ones that you view as most secure that you've worked with.
Sure.
Give us a sense of what specific actions are they taking? How are they organizing around security? How are they architecting that solution? Give us some thoughts around that. So what, in the sense that if I want to be a leading end user here, what should I be doing in your experience? What would you?
I talked about this yesterday as well, that I think I'm a big proponent of data first. I could give two hoots about the hardware. We can deal with the hardware any given time. You got to start with the data, work backwards, right? Putting access controls around data. What is accessible? How is it going to be accessible? What are form factors required? Is there any OS dependencies on these platforms? So I think from a best practice perspective, I think organizations where we come in and sort of advocate, hey, who's using data? How are we using it? And then sort of try to formulate a game plan around that, right? Group policies is a good and bad thing. If you look at it, it's easy for access management, but to manage it from a data perspective becomes quite challenging. So best practices, I'd say, from a mobile perspective, I think it's figuring out, like, there's a new thing with conditional access for Intune. How can you ensure that your corporate data is being accessed through trusted resources, right? And I gave a use case yesterday as well. You look at a Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Exchange Online. Say I'm here at this conference, I lost my device. What are the conditional access policies enable for me to access Exchange Online from the business center, right? Is it multi-factor authentication? Is it 2 authentications as opposed to 1? Well, what if I don't have my device to go into my MFA, my authenticator app to accept that or pull that 6-digit code, right? So there has to be certain things that have to be in place. And I believe this gentleman talked a little bit about, where's that coming from authentication for voice recognition or facial recognition, right? And that's something that's huge, right? And another gentleman was talking about, we had these discussions yesterday about it, so it's pretty relevant. But baseline, I'd say, making sure your data is in the right hands, integrate amongst systems to be able to have enough visibility, list your list of vendors and who you're working with, and invest in them from a platform perspective to say, hey, do they work well together? Can I piggyback on certain applications to talk to each other to have more visibility into them? A lot of the MDM guys, UEM guys, EMM, whatever name that Gartner decides to give them. If you look at what they provided to integrate with the MDM Graph API side that's available from Microsoft today, it gives you that visibility. It says, hey, it's a BYOD device, prevent copy, paste, screenshots, et cetera. That's a baseline now, right? Where it's going to go, who knows, right? But I think the baselines have to be addressed and provisioned at any organization.
Grant, from your point of view, if you were to kind of look at leading customers that you see that are really advanced, what do you see as their key actions that they're taking?
So one is, we have to kind of, I completely agree with the notion it's data, first of all. I mean, what's your most critical asset? Second to your people. And what I do find quite fascinating, being in this industry and seeing how it's evolved, we've done just the opposite of what we really should have done. Genie's out of the bottle, but if I were starting fresh Etch-a-Sketch, right, just shook it for 30 seconds, it's clean, I would start on how I protect the data first. I would give minimal, not maximum, access and permissions. I would trust no one not everyone. And I would build my policies for access on zero trust. And I would only take baby steps until I reach the point where I've satisfied what you need or want. So that doesn't jive with convenient, giving one password to your mean guy and he can access everything, right? Because you take that same approach into the public cloud, and it's not all, I mean, it's all capital ALL services, the entire stack. And the guy's not used to, or the girl's not used to that, and you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. So, and the challenge is, you know, we're all lemmings and we're off the cliff, man. We're falling, right? So we've already got there. So now it's just trying to figure out how we can jump on somebody else's back and minimize the impact. So we got to kind of step back and say, how can we turn this upside down and make it minimal, not maximal? Because remember, you start moving into the cloud with microservices, and again, instead of 10 firewalls in the policies, you've got 1,000 microservices, and each one of them have a policy. And that's how you want it. But you got to start thinking about, how do I pull back and only let out what I want to let out, not just give it out to everybody.
So I think there's an underlying problem. We're too quick to give.
Yes.
We've given too early, right? And I had a conversation. I believe there was somebody I was talking about yesterday with adoption. They're so worried about noise and Big Brother's watching, et cetera. And how do you limit? How do you bring back what you've already given?
Yeah.
It's like me giving you a plate of food and say, "Oh, sorry, I'm gonna take that."
You only get a
Phil
bite
does
of
that
each.
to me all the time.
Yeah.
But
I think the last thing I'll say is to your first point about encryption. It's really, I just spent 2 years with a startup before I left in June to join Dome 9 for 4 months before I got to Checkpoint. But I was there about 2.5 years, heavily focused on IoT, blockchain, and it was really this very cool, awesome encryption and compression technology. And you know, one of the problems we have is that we've been trying to shove SSL into IoT. Mm-hmm. TLS. I mean, it's really been kind of funny. But I do think it's great how it's become so mainstream. But what's the problem when anything becomes so mainstream? Now no one trusts it. Most every enterprise I talk to has an SSL decryption appliance, a legit man in the middle to decrypt everything, because most of the viruses are getting delivered via SSL. So you kind of go, something's just not lining up. But I do think we need to start to really look at our data as the most important thing. Encrypt it all the time. The technologies are out there. It's easy.
So encrypt your data, don't share it.
Unless you, I'm going to share only as much. I mean, it's minimal, not maximal, right?
Yeah.
Minimum, not maximum. Less, not more. Trust no one, and only trust as much as you can, or have to, in order to get the job done.
So of course that's kind of the dichotomy then, right? So we're seeing a business environment is speeding up with more interaction points, more endpoints, more automated transactions with more partners, doing it far faster. And at the same time, we want to encrypt it all. We don't want to share it. We want to minimize it. So how do we manage that?
You do want to share it, but you don't want to say, oh, you want access to some file? Oh, well, here's a login to my database.
it's a controlled share. It's more in the sense that you have a predefined policy for that specific repository, that specific data set, and saying, if you want it, these are the controls around it, based on who you are, what your job function is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what you need to do with that data. And that's all predefined, right?
So before we take a question, so John, from your point of view, obviously you work with great many clients. What does IBM see as, the ones that are really the most advanced, the most secure? What are they doing differently?
Sure, and I'll share this feedback in the context of endpoints, right? Because that's kind of my realm of expertise. But in terms of what clients are actually getting it right and doing it the right approach would be starting kind of, the bedrock would be devices, right? But instead of the traditional approach where you're saying, okay, I'm going to manage my iPhones and iPads with this approach, and I'm going to do my Androids with this approach, and Microsoft Windows devices with this approach, you're going to start taking on more of a device agnostic point of view in terms of how you manage those devices. And from a user experience standpoint, making sure that they have a consistent experience across those devices, right? And then beyond that, it's what's on those devices that gets more important. So you're switching from focusing on the devices and you're going into more of an app and user-based context in how you manage your environment and protect your data, right? So things like the containers that have been rolled out through MDM and EMM platforms for years, still very important to implement and make sure that you're utilizing, especially when you have personal devices entering a corporate context. Beyond that, identity and access management, we think the companies that are really getting it right are flipping that on. We have it out of the box available to all of our customers. Some don't even really see the value of it or even know how to take advantage of it. But single sign-on, conditional access, making sure the right users are getting access to the right information goes a long way. So yeah, those factors, building on top of one another, and then AI or whatever term we want to use to describe it, layered on top, it just adds additional advantages.
Yeah. Questions from? We have a question here in the middle, Phil.
I'm Sandeep from CIBC, and I think we had a lot of wonderful discussion about the access part of it for the data, minimal access, need to know basis. What is your experience about speed of access to the data? So typical use case that happens is, I think it's for all of the customers also, like some people may not have access to the data, but they know how to manipulate the data or how to present the data. And because they're not the owner of the data, they won't have access to the data. Other side is people who have access to the data are not the best manipulator of the data. When I say manipulate, it's like how to be presented, all those things, to get all the information out, to get the intelligence out of the data. And I always see a disconnect that the person who actually needs the intelligence out of the data, the person who can create intelligence doesn't have access. And by the time they get the access to get the intelligence to be done, the time is already passed by. So it's more about speed of access. I totally agree that not everybody should have access to it. It should be need-to-know basis. But then there should be something where it allows you to have the speed to access is key to where we are at this time. It's like if I'm competing for a business, I need data on the business, of course. My account manager is not an SQL expert. My technology team is an SQL expert, but my technology team cannot have an access to the accounting data because that's supposed to be division up. But now my technology team needs that SQL to run against that data, but it doesn't have access. By the time he gets access, all of those things set up, takes a week or week and a half, and of course, other bank already got the business out of it.
Yep, so we actually, with our identity management capabilities, we have built-in delegation functionality that the administrator can tap into to give line of business managers the ability to say yes or no to who needs what or who doesn't need that. And from the administrator's perspective, they don't always have that contextual awareness, right? So leaving it up to that manager to make that decision or make that call, here are all the apps you have to work from, does this person need it or not, and give them the ability to make that call. It speeds up the process a bit.
Yeah, I mean, so what in your mind should be the expectation?
Real time.
Real time?
If it's not real time, we failed as a service provider.
And I'll bet
Period.
every one of you will too.
100%.
I mean, we've done that, right? You go some website and you hit and it's spinning and it's like, okay, I'm out.
Yep.
I'm going. I've got the next thing to go do.
Right.
So I think it has to be now. And I think to your point, that's what's expected. The challenge is, and I think a lot of times we've grown up thinking security is something that we got to lock and stop and block, and it is all of that. But really, at the end of the day, we need to remember it's the enabler.
Yeah.
It is what enables me to use my mobile phone to check something really important from an airport through the use of the technology and the right security. So if we constantly look at it in the context of how can I enable this transaction, this access to data, but do it from a minimal trust, minimal access, controlled access, I think is the healthiest way.
So let me build on that. So delegation access, predefined access through identity controls, 100%. That's a baseline. But if you look at the document that's you would like to share within your organization, maybe read-only access, MFA, trusted device. Those are 3 baseline items that have to be there. You still need access from approvals from managers and executive leadership to be able to access or not 100%. But there would be a specific process to request that change to that policy to give access to that user group or a specific user. Right? So I think you definitely have to leverage the controls that are there. They have to be predefined at the identity level. That's a no-brainer. But you can also have a baseline of standard controls across your devices which hit those 3 checkboxes, two-factor, trusted or not, read-only, whatever it might be, depending on what it is.
If I may, just share a real quick story. I'm in Florida at an executive conference speaking. I need to print a shipping label. And this is to the point of no matter how hard we try, I go into one of those little phone booth boxes to print my shipping label in the computer, and the printer's already there, and I kind of move my cursor down over the start menu, and there's a browser window with an email. I clicked and pop it out. Here's a 3-page email thread from a public company that'll remain unnamed with the number of monthly transactions they performed last year and through September this year for the CEO to have for his earnings tour. And I printed it off. Now, the amazing thing is, I know that CEO. I used to work for him. He's a personal friend. And so I let him know. And this was the senior product manager of his company that did this. It was a human. All the safeguards from controls, it was her email. She had access to it, right? Human error. And we're talking some pretty sensitive information. Scotty was happy that it was me that happened to walk into that booth. But that's the kind of thing that we will never be able to create policy to stop. That's what we're up against.
Yeah. So human error, that's hard to plan for. Does that cover your question?
The other issue I always find is once access is given, how to take it back. Especially with, I can give my own example. I know I have 50 employees directly, I'm responsible for access.
Yeah.
Once I give them an access, I say, yeah, approve the access. I need to remember those access needs to be taken back.
Yeah. Well,
And-
look at we talk
As
about
a human, it's always going to the
if you
next
take
task.
it back, all I got to do is, there's screenshots, there's grab, there's get your phone out and take a picture of the screen. There's a point where we all have to just realize we got to hire the people we trust. We got to trust the people we hire. But from a security and access perspective, I still don't trust you.
So
I trust you.
Again, the identity management tool becomes critical in order to. You can't remove the human in the equation, but at least
Correct.
you can.
There's nothing 100%, right? Like I remember I spoke to someone at CIBC a while back, and they had a geofence that says as soon as you come into the building, you can't use your camera, right? So for that use case, and people are thinking
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
there's always going to be something. You're always going to be patching and trying to get these little holes. Is it going to get there? I sure hope so. It's going
My
to take
last
some
little
time.
granticdote is remember, whether it's your best friend or your worst enemy, you get shot in the head, the funeral costs are the same. Okay? So look at ways to eradicate the unintended through controls, through minimum access, so you can really focus on the guys that know how to self-assign an IP address, because most people don't even have a clue to what it is. Subnet, what's that?
So we got another question then?
Yeah. A fact. Security professionals within IT are the most, are viewed as the most anti-business of any IT executive.
They're the progress prevention team.
Let me finish. Okay. And at the time we're moving forward with catering everything in IT to the meeting of business objectives, and this 20, 30-year reputation of security professionals to not enabling the business required of the line of business to survive as a company, what would you be recommending to your clients or prospects on how they can better connect with the line of business demands that are now driving what enterprises do. I mean, it's one thing to stand up and say, you got to minimize everything, you got to maximize all this, you got to, what is it that you can do and say to them based on your experience to help them step up? And there's always a balance of achieving the
question.
business direction versus that.
So why don't we start with John to address this, if you want to comment on how do we enable the required speed of the business today?
Sure, and we see this, our platform, now we've got CMT capabilities built into what traditionally have been MDM, EMM capabilities. So you see a lot of these blurred lines in terms of who owns this now, right? And I think internal communication is a critical part of getting there, right? And making sure that expectations are set up front on what, as a united front, are we looking to accomplish? What are the outcomes we're looking to have, right? And making sure that those expectations are set up front before you carry out any given project. Moving forward on the unified endpoint management front, those teams are gonna have to come to a consensus on who owns it, right? Do you work together on it? Do they go do something else now? And why, right? And the more that these platforms become a little bit more, as I mentioned, universally applicable and device agnostic, you're gonna see that those roles, the lines continue to get even more blurred, and you're gonna have to confront it. So my advice would just be communication, setting expectations, and making a decision that makes most sense within the confines of what you're looking to do.
Maybe Grant or Deepak, who wants to go first?
So I guess what I would recommend would be, the challenge has been, it's been coming up, and management and subsequent higher ups and executives are hearing, hey, we're having fights down below. And the awareness of the security issues that we've had, I think we'll all agree, have become much more prevalent in the executive suites in the last, say, 5 years than previous, right? So we set this precedent for a number of years that now we're trying to also undo. So I really think the most effective is to have it start at the top. At the top, and communicate down to your lieutenants. You start to have your security team in every one of your business meetings, every one of your QBRs. When you identify your objectives, they're in the meeting with you to find out if they can do it. So you can come back and tell me, no excuses, how it's going to get done. It is communication, it is participation, but the difference is getting rid of the precedent we've set for the last 10 or 20 years and flipping it on its head and having it come from the top.
Right, so embedding security by design early on in business decisions inside the LOB.
I just wrote an article for Forbes I was a ghostwriter for our CEO, but it was about, so Zohar Lan does not live in Seattle, but it was about the industrial world and how we really could learn from them. Because I drive by Weyerhaeuser and Fiber and these other factories, they've got a big gate and a big sign, and what's on that big sign? Every one of you know it. 143 days with no accidents. Right. So that comes from the top, right? So if we start to think, how can we go 137 days with no malware, with no breach, with no compromise? And we push that through the organization. That's how you start to change.
Deepak?
I think, so I agree with everything Grant just said, but my challenge is, we have this discussion multiple times. We're sitting in front of a board, I'm there, I'm having a discussion. They all say security, the term security is there. If you ask a C-level, hey, what's security to you? So nobody will hack my Facebook account, right? Like it's more, I'm being completely honest, and it's about the education. And sometimes you have to use that as a reference point to give them an understanding so no one hacks your email account, or no one accesses your ERP systems, your financial documents, et cetera, right? So it has to be relevant. It has to be, I think there has to be a certain level of transparency within the organizations to teach and educate your users to say, guys, this is what's happening, right? So one of our organizations that we work with, they have security professionals. First of all, no one has a budget for a security professional, right? We have to find money for this. Like this has to become, it's become mainstream, but it has to be a priority enough where we have to ensure that there's money. If you can't put an FTE resource, find somebody else that can help you with it in a part-time capacity. It doesn't matter what it is, but that needs to be there. But I think having full disclosure, us as organizations, leaders in our organization, we're always closed. We're like, hey, we're not going to share this, right? And if you want to push something down, get the CEO to sign off on it, use his signature, and push it out to everybody, and hopefully somebody's going to read it. Or at a town hall or something like that. It doesn't work. But if you actually educate that end user, or full disclosure, guys, we had a breach, this was the impact, this is how much dollars we lost, this is how many jobs were lost because of this, I guarantee you they'll get their, something together, right? And in line. It becomes almost critical for the operation of the business and putting food on the table that, hey guys, we have to take this into account. It's serious enough, right? So I agree the top-down approach, but I think the education has to be there, the transparency has to be there, and disclosure has to be there.
So we're almost out of runway here. So one final question from the audience over here.
It's actually not a question, I think, to contribute that, my name is B. Adinira, I'm from Shaw. To contribute the security personnel need to learn the business too, because we talk about security controls, but it's about the risk. What is my risk appetite? What am I willing to put at stake to gain something?
I think that's a phenomenal point, right? If we don't understand the business, how the hell are we going to secure it? Right. At the cost of, if we lock something down and say, hey, you can't use this, and now the opportunity cost is you can't operate in the field and generate revenue or do what you need to do. We talk about access management. I'm a sales guy. I'm in the field. I need access to my CRM application. There's a document that says, hey, this is what they paid for.
Yep.
If you need that, you need access to that. You need to understand, have visibility to what's happening operationally.
No, that's a great final
phenomenal
point. So we'll leave it at that. So thank you, panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.